You're going to be Abdul right now, all right? Abdul. You're happy, you're a Muslim, you love that. What about Jesus Christ? Don't we also have a hadith of Jesus, the sayings of Jesus? Don't we also have a sirah of Jesus, the biography of Jesus? Yes, we do, don't we? For those of you who are Christian, not you, Abdul, you're a Muslim, okay? Stay a Muslim right now. So, as a Muslim, you don't have anything for 200 to 300 years, but we have the sirah of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? Who wrote down what Jesus did. The hadith of Jesus, what he said, that's written in red letters in some of your Bibles. Anytime Jesus spoke, that's the hadith of Jesus. So we have the same genre, right? The tafsir of what Jesus said and did would be the commentaries of Paul's letters. He would take what Jesus said and apply it to Ephesus and to Philippi and to Corinth, right? So there's the tafsir. So we have the same genre in our New Testament, and then the tarikh, which would be the histories of mankind. That is in the book of Acts, the history of the early church. So we have the same four genres that you see up on the screen there. But when were they written? We're going to get to that. Hold on to that, because that's going to answer one of my questions. So you stay right there, Abdul. I'm going to keep talking to you. I like that. When a guy agrees with me, it's so nice, funny to have someone that agrees with me. I'm going to put up Abdul Malik's name there because he is the one that actually introduces the name Muhammad. Did I say Muhammad? Ooh, boy, slap my mouth. No, he doesn't. He doesn't introduce the name Muhammad. You're going to see why in about 10 minutes. Nonetheless, he's the first one to get up that title. And it's not Muhammad, as you're going to find out. But it's these people here, the Abbasids that I've just put up there, they are the ones that actually make him into the Muhammad that we know today. And I'm emphasizing Muhammad for a reason. I'm overemphasizing it for a reason. You'll see why. So, conclusion. Muhammad was revealed 84 years after the Abbasids created him, 141 years after he was first introduced, yet 201 years after he supposedly lived. Raymond, however, considers this 200-year gap as perfectly acceptable and thus not a problem. How many of you agree with Raymond? You should. Raise your hand. You just did. Come on, Abdul, get your hand up there. He's suddenly getting a chicken foot because he knows that he's going to be put on the hot seat. Don't get chicken foot on me, please. Stay there. I want you to be a good Muslim tonight, all right? And here's the other problem. Look at the distance and direction. Now, everything that Muslims, including Abdul sitting here, says happens in those two cities that you see right there that are circled in green. Do you see them up there? Mecca and Medina. That's where everything happens. That's where all this takes place. That's where Muhammad lived. That's where he was born, there in Mecca. He was there for 52 years, then moved to Medina, and he spent that whole time receiving this book here in those two cities. Do you see where they are? Just so you see them on the map. But here's the problem. Everything we know that's written about him, about his life, does not come from those cities. They come from that city, Baghdad, which is 1,200 miles away. Ibn Hisham, the man who actually wrote that, this guy here who wrote on his biography, he was born in Basra, grew up in Cairo, and wrote in Baghdad. Basra is a good 1,200 miles away. Cairo is a good 990 miles away, and of course Baghdad is 1,200 miles. The guy who wrote down his sayings came from Bukhara, which is in Uzbekistan, which is 2,600 miles away. The guy who wrote down all the tafsir and the tahriq comes from Tabaristan, which is northern Iran today. That is 1,700 miles. None of these traditional writers lived or worked in Mecca or Medina. They were way too far to the north of Mecca and came from the west and east of Baghdad. Doesn't Raymond realize that these are Abbasid writers, all writing after 750 and way too far away? Has he forgotten about this? Or should we remind him? Abdul, you're his spokesman now. You tell me. Please knock on his door and tell him, all right? And ask him, how is he going to answer this question? Let's continue on. But which Muhammad is Raymond talking about? Which is the Muhammad that you support, Ahmed? Or no, I'm sorry, you're Abdul. I'm going to keep changing your name. Abdul. Okay, Abdul, which is the one you support? See, if you support the Muhammad of Islam, then you have to agree to four things. And Raymond has to agree these four things. Number one, he must have the name Muhammad that looks like that. There it is. This is the only Arabic I'm going to force on you people tonight, all right? You don't have to learn Arabic tonight, but learn that name there. You know Arabic?
Yeah, we are from Egyptian.
You're Egyptian. Okay, is that Muhammad up there?
Yes.
Okay, is there a Dama and a Fatah up there?
Yes.
Is there a Mimdal?
Yes.
Okay, so that's Muhammad. Okay, we got our Arab speakers down here. All right, you're going to help me out, all right? The rest of you, don't worry about it. Just listen to me say yes to everything I say. So that's what Muhammad looks like, right? And whenever you read it, that's what it looks like. Hugely important, you'll see why. Now, he must have lived in the city of Mecca. In order to be the Muhammad of Islam, he had to have come from Mecca. If he didn't come from Mecca, he's no longer the Muhammad of Islam, because he spent 52 years there, folks. He received half this book there. All right? That's where the holy places are. That's where the Kaaba is. That's where everybody focuses 5 times a day praying towards. So it has to be Mecca. Number 3, he must have received this Quran, all 114 surahs, from that place and from that time, and everything had to have happened in the 7th century. Those are the 4 things you have to claim. Are you following me, Abdul? You're starting to get a little nervous now. Don't worry. If you're getting nervous, what about Raymond Ibrahim? Okay? So those are the 4 things you have to accept. Conclusion, all 4 of the above criteria, the man, the place, the book, and the time, must be fulfilled in order to prove that the Muhammad of Islam actually existed, that your Muhammad actually existed. All right? So let's go ahead and let's start and let's look at this name. Now, Raymond suggests that we can find the name Muhammad in a written text, just like the one I showed you. Mimha Mimdal with a Dama Fatah and Fatah. All right? But that name requires 4 consonants and 3 vowels. Am I correct? In the 7th century, there were no vowels. Ooh, There were no vowels in the Arabic text. Today there are, right? But back in the 7th century, there were only 16 consonants. How many consonants are there in the text today? 28. That's right, thank you. 28 today, but 16 back then. Where did they get the other 12 from? They didn't exist in the 7th century. They had to be created in the 8th and 9th century. All right, are you following this? You're my Arab speakers, okay? If you get it, the rest of you will not get it. But as long as you get it, that's important, okay? So the earliest Quranic manuscripts, now look at them, here they are. I'm giving you 5 of the earliest 6 manuscripts. I want my Arab speakers to go up and read what's up there on those scripts. Can you read it? No, you cannot.
Well, of course it is not Arabic.
It is Arabic.
But it is not Arabic.
Old Arabic. It is old Arabic.
What's wrong with it?
It is written like a hieroglyphic.
You can't read a word of it, can you? You can try to guess what it is, but you need 5 dots, don't you?
The letters are not connected.
If you have 1 dot above little bold face, that becomes a nun, right? If you have 2 dots, it becomes a ta. If you have 3 dots, it becomes a tha. If you have 1 dot below, it becomes a ba. And 2 dots becomes a ya. Na, ta, tha, ba, ya. Do you see them up there? Not 1 dot. So you can't read it, can you? And yet these are the earliest Quranic manuscripts. And these are not from the 7th century. These are from the 8th and 9th century. So what Muhammad are you talking about? Where's Muhammad there? Because Muhammad requires 3 vowels. Do you see any vowels in any of those manuscripts? Do you see any damas or kasras or fatas? I don't see any. And this is why Raymond hasn't done his history. Are you listening to this, Abdul? Please listen. This is for you too. I know you don't know Arabic, but they agree with me. In the 7th century, there were no 5 dots. Today, there are 5 dots. These diacritical marks had to be invented because nobody could read that. You can't read it. But that's why they had to be created in the 8th and 9th century. So with that in mind, what does the word Muhammad look like today? That's what it looks like today, all right? You both agreed with me that. But since there were no vowels back then, this is what it looked like back then. Now read it. Ooh, did you hear? Mahmad. So suddenly it goes from Muhammad to Mahmad. Thank you. Let's give her a hand. Abdul, what are you doing? You're not supposed to be clapping. This is shutting you down. You just keep somber for a while, okay? So now it's become Mimha Mimdal with no vowels, which means this is a word. It's not Muhammad, but it's Mahmad. How do we know that? How can we prove that right now? Well, we need to go to John of Damascus, good old John of Damascus. See, John of Damascus was there in the courts of Abdul Malik from 685 to 705. He was a Christian. He was there in Damascus. That's why he's called John of Damascus. He was a treasure for Abdul Malik. And so he was watching what was happening, and he was seeing that this dispute was happening between the Ishmaelites and those who come in the line of Isaac. The Jews and the Christians come in the line of Isaac, but the Umayyads were Ishmaelites, and they did not have a prophetic line. They didn't have any scripture like the Jews and the Christians had. And yet they controlled now from, by the time Abd al-Malik comes to power, from Spain all the way to India and from Turkey all the way to Yemen. So they were the second biggest superpower of their day. The problem is they had no identity. The Byzantine Empire, the other biggest empire that there was, the biggest competitor, they had a prophetic line. They had a scripture. They had a whole series of prophets. What did the Ishmaelites have? They needed a prophet, and they needed a book, a revelation, that would equal what was going on. So he was watching this, right? He sees this all happening. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't write anything because he's under their employ. So when he retires in 730, now look at the date, 730, we're well into the 8th century. We're 100 years after Muhammad had died, if Muhammad had existed. He then writes his greatest masterpiece. And what does he title it? Look at the title. The Heresy of the Ishmaelites. Ooh, I love that. Why does he say heresy of the Muslims? Because there were no Muslims that early. Muslims, that word did not exist. We can't find any reference. Why does he say heresy of the Muslims? Because there were no Muslims that early. Muslims, that word did not exist. We can't find any reference for anybody called Muslims. No Muslims. So he calls them Ishmaelites. Ishmaelites. Now we see what's going on. And he talks about this prophet that these Ishmaelites have. This, what does he say? He says that from that tonight, a false prophet called Muhammad. Now notice he's writing in Greek. In Greek, the vowels are there. Look at the Greek, those who can read Greek. What does it say up there on the top left that's circled? Muhammad. It's Muhammad. John in Damascus tells us what it is. It's Muhammad. So this Muhammad, who after conversing with an Arian monk, who are the Arians? They didn't believe that Jesus was God. They didn't believe in the Trinity, and they didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They didn't believe Jesus at all was divine. Arius is the one that brought this up in the 4th century. The Arian controversy has been around ever since, almost from the 2nd century. You have the Ebionites bringing up the same problem. Arius brought this up in the 4th century. Athanasius was told to shut him down at the Council of Nicaea, which he did, and here it raises its head again. And there is John of Damascus watching this. He's ringside seat, and he writes this, his greatest piece. And he says, this Muhammad, this new prophet, this Arian monk who get your material from, and he goes on, he fabricates his own heresy, and then he talks about that this monk has 4 books. The book of the cow, ooh, that's Surah 2 in the Quran today. The book of the women, that's Surah 4 in the Quran today. The book of the table, that's Surah 5 of the Quran today, and the book of the camel. There is no surah called the camel. But what are 4 books doing when there's supposed to be only 1 book called the Quran? Isn't that interesting? This is 730, well into the 8th century. But now we know who this Muhammad is. His name is not Muhammad, his name is Muhammad. So who in the world is Muhammad? Wait till you find out. Here we go. What does Muhammad mean in Arabic? It is not a name, it is a title. It means the praised one, the blessed one, the anointed one, or even the Messiah. It's a title, folks. Have any of you heard this name before? You have? Where have you heard it? Okay, in Arabic, but where did you hear it before Arabic? How about Hebrew? Anybody here speak Hebrew? Anybody studied Hebrew? Have you looked at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament? You will find Muhammad 11 times in the Old Testament. Muhammad is well known in the Bible. You didn't know that, did you? Well, here we go. The Uyghurites were the first to introduce this word in 1400 BC, the Muhammad, the praised one, the anointed one. It was then borrowed in Hebrew in 1000 BC and put into our Bibles 11 times. Song of Solomon 5:16, the Muhammad, the altogether lovely one, the praised one that Solomon's referring to. There's the Muhammad we're looking for. Now, by the 4th century, St. Ambrose, the early church father, took it. Remember, Arabic comes from Aramaic, which comes from Hebrew. So therefore, it's all the same letters. They use all the same letters. They're all Semitic letters. They use the same consonantal text. And therefore, St. Ambrose, writing in Syriac, talks about this Muhammad from Song of Solomon 5:16. And he says this is a title for Jesus Christ, the Anointed One, the Messiah. That's what the Anointed One is. From that time on, from the 4th century AD, it was this Muhammad was employed by many of the church fathers. Here's some examples. Origen, in the early 3rd century, the Christian theologian, interpret the Song of Solomon 5:16, a passage as the unique scripture where the eschatological nuptials of Christ and his bride are present. St. Ambrose in the 4th century AD introduced the ideas of that Song of Solomon 5:16 passage referred to Mahmud was to be considered a title for Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Gregory of Elvira continued that idea in the late 4th century. St. John Cassian continued that in the 5th century. St. Augustine, the great church father, continued that in the 5th century, and then Apollonius in the middle of the 7th century also believed that this Mahmud was Jesus Christ. Conclusion, the title Mahmud, not the name Mahmud, the title Mahmud, was a common title for Jesus by the 7th century in the church in that part of the world, especially in Arabic, which took it from Aramaic. So we should not be surprised when we find it written in many places at that time. It's written all over the place. That's why we find Mahmud after Mahmud after Mahmud. But it's not just the Christians, the Jews also use that title in Hebrew. If you have any doubt, just take a look at this inscription from 523. This is a good 100 years before Muhammad even came in, when Muhammad died. And this is a 6th century Jewish rock inscription in what is today Yemen. It's there in Najran. And it is translated by the Lord of the Jews by the Mahmud. The Mahmud in Sabbaic script, I'm just putting it out to you. You can see it there in Sabbaic script. This is not the Arabic script that we see in the Quran. This is the Sabbaic script that comes from Yemen. It is Arabic, but it's not the same script. Isn't that interesting? But look at the term Mahmud that is used there by the Jews. So, let's show you a quick synopsis. Mahmud means the praised one, or the blessed one, or the anointed one, or even the Messiah later on. So it's not a name. It's not a name, folk. It's a title. It was used in Ugaritic in 1400 BC, borrowed by the Jews in Hebrew in 1000 BC. That's why you have it 11 times in our Bible. It was subsequently employed by St. Ambrose in the 4th century as a title for Jesus Christ. The Jews also referred to it in their reference. And what was interesting, by the 7th century, the Jews started using that title for their exilarchs. The exilarchs were those who were in charge of the seminary in what is today Baghdad. Arabic. So they have all been speaking Arabic, and they had always put Mahmud before their name. Mahmud ben Huziel. Mahmud ben David, Mahmud ben everyone. They have 5 different exilarchs where they put Mahmud before the name, the praised one, the anointed one. It was a title of endearment, of authority, of credibility, well used in Arabic and Aramaic by the 7th century. Thus, by the 7th century, the Christians used Mahmud to refer to the returning Messiah, while the Jews used Mahmud to refer to the Messiah yet to come, and at times interchanged it with the Messiah. Conclusion, therefore, the term Mahmud was well known in that part of the world and at that time, but it was not pronounced Muhammad like you do today. That is how we now pronounce it. And there lies the confusion that Raymond's having, and same with you, Abdul. I can see you're confused now as well. So, folks, knowing that, let's now look and see exactly when Muhammad's story was created within Islam itself. All right? So we're not looking for Muhammad anymore. We need to look for Mahmud. That's who we need to look to. You need to go to the evidence from that century. So how well did the Muslims preserve Muhammad's story, their Muhammad story? Now we're getting back to the Muhammad of Islam, your Muhammad, Abdul, okay? And Raymond's Muhammad. How well did they preserve their manuscripts? Now here's the problem. When anyone asks Muslims how they can be sure that the story they have of Muhammad is true, this one right here, this story by Ibn Hisham, they point to numerous books on their bookshelves, including this one right here, and claim that they were written by those who knew Muhammad. Did Ibn Hisham know Muhammad? No, he died in 833. That's 200 years later. He certainly did not know Muhammad. That they saw what he did and they heard what he said, but they never show us their original extant codices or their original manuscripts. Nor do they ever give us any forensically tested dates concerning when exactly those books were originally written. To be valid witnesses for Muhammad, we must have their traditional writers' original extant manuscripts. So the question I'm asking is, where is the original extant manuscript for Ibn Hisham? That's all I'm asking. That which they actually wrote. Remember, the compilers of the Prophet's life, Ibn Hisham, Al-Waqidi, and what he said, Al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Ibn Dawud, Tirmidhi, Ibn Najah, and Nasai, all of them were living in the caliphal courts. They were there in Baghdad. Therefore, they had all the wealth to their disposal. They did not have to depend on papyrus, like the early church fathers had to depend on. All of our tafsir and our tahqiq and our sirah and our hadith were all written on papyrus, which are these interlocking leaves. And they disintegrate within 100 years. Okay, they get dry and they crinkle away. That's not the case for the Muslims. Are you hearing this, Abdul? That's not the case for you guys, because you were in the caliphal courts. You were in the richest land in the world, the richest place. Therefore, you did not use papyrus. You would have used parchment or vellum, animal skins. If that were so, then those extant manuscripts still be available today. We should still see them. Where are they, Abdul? I'm picking on him because Raymond Ibrahim is not here today. You can go and shake your hands with Abraham. You're taking on his place for him. And that's what we need to ask Muslims. Where are these original manuscripts for the Sirah, for the Hadith, for the Tafsir, for the Tariq, for all of these references that you're talking about, and including the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. Now, the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, the Sahaba would be the companions of the Prophet, okay? The equivalent that we would have would be Matthew and John. They were the companions of Jesus. They were right there watching what Jesus did and hearing what Jesus said. So they would be our Sahaba. The Tabi'un were those who got it from the Sahaba. So they would be like Mark and Luke, who got it from the eyewitnesses. Okay, so two different generations. First generation would be the companions. The second were those who got it from the companions. Okay, so we have the same equivalent in Christianity, right? So Muslims are saying that we do have the Sahaba and we do have the Tabi'un. Are you ready? So we have spent 2 years. What I'm going to show you now, no one's seen yet, okay? This is 2 years worth of study. We decided to find out where these manuscripts are. No one has done this work until we did it. And it's just coming out of Europe right now, so you're getting it. Here we go. So the Sahaba, the eyewitnesses or the companions of the Prophet, and the Tabi'un, those who received what they knew from the Sahaba. What we're told by Muslims is that there are many Sahaba. Actually, they only list about 5 of them, and the Tabi'un. They were writing in the 7th and the 8th century. This is a lie. You ready? Let's see who they quote. These are the ones they quote. Muwatta of Ibn Malik. It comes not from the 7th century. It comes from the 9th century. The Sahifa of Haman bin Munabi. It does not come from the 7th century. It comes from the 12th century. That's 500 years later. The Musnad of Ibn Hanbal, it comes from the 13th century, that's 600 years later. It comes from the Musnad of Abdul Razak, that's 600 years later, along with the Musnad of Al-Tailisi, that's 1300 century, that's 600 years later, and Abid Shaiba, that's 600 years later. Not one of these are from the 7th and 8th century. All of that has been a lie. And we didn't know that until the last 2 years, because we assumed that they had the manuscripts. They have no manuscript for any of these guys. These documents were all supposedly created in the 7th century, that's what Muslims tell us, yet they do not begin to appear until the 9th to the 13th century, thus 200 to 600 years too late. This suggests that they were all written by others hundreds of years later. Consequently, they are all redacted attributions. Now, let's put that on a timeline, show you what I'm talking about. So when the Muslims, when you come up and they say, we know where the Sahaba and where the Tabi'un, they're looking at these 5, 6 guys right here. That's where they put them, right up next to Muhammad there. None of them come from there. The first one, the earliest one is Ibn Malik, that's from the 9th century. Then you have Munabi, 12th century. You have Hanbal, 13th century, along with Razak. And then you have Tailisi, and then you have Ibn Shaiba. All of them are 12th and 13th century. Can you see the problem, folks? Therefore, the Sahaba and the Tabi'un, they are not first and second generations. They are not eyewitnesses. Our equivalent would be Matthew and John. Yet they were written 200 to 600 years later and simply redacted back to the 7th and 8th century. Thus, they are probably fraudulent. Now, since we started introducing this onto Fander Films, which I started doing this spring, the Muslims are coming back saying, aha, Mr. Smith, yes, but we have the Musnad, the Muwatta of Ibn Malik. The Muwatta of Ibn Malik is 9th century. Have you heard them say this? Maybe you haven't, but Abdul, you've been saying it a lot of times because you caught me on this a week ago. And you've been hammering me on this. What about the Muwatta Ibn Malik? You see, that's 9th century. That's 9th century, you say. That's only 200 years after Muhammad. Okay, let's go back and see if that's true. Let's take a look. There is a partial copy of the Muwatta in the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. It is described as the second third of a celebrated treatise on the Islamic jurisprudence and is dated 890. I will give you that, Abdul. But here's the problem. When does the Muwatta get finalized? It does not, the complete manuscript from the Muwatta does not get finalized until 1030. That's the 11th century. So you really have nothing earlier than the 11th century. What's more, as of today, 1030 manuscript is the earliest fully extant copy of Ibn Malik's work. But here's the problem. Who cares? Ibn Malik has nothing to do with Muhammad, has nothing to do with the origins of Islam. Ibn Malik is nothing more than about the rules of jurisprudence. It's nothing about the origin. He's just talking about the rules that existed in the 9th and 10th and 11th century. So why is he even in this discussion? Do you see the problem? You're using the wrong genre, Abdul. Sorry. I know you're going to have a hard time after this. We'll go to dinner together and I'll pay for your meal. Now, knowing that, since we know that, let's relook at the Sahaba and the Tabi'un. Let's put them on a timeline. So Abdul and Raymond and the other Muslims, they claim that they're all hugged up against Muhammad. No, they're not. They first put the Muwatta of Ibn Malik is there, but we now know that he's not there. Actually, he is here. So goodbye to Ibn Malik. He doesn't belong there, and certainly the others. So really, they don't begin to appear until the 11th century. So everything we know about these Sahaba or these Tabi'un do not come from the 7th and 8th century. They come from the 11th to the 13th century. That's 400 to 600 years too late. And this is the first time you're hearing that. What about the Sirah? What about the biography? What about this book right here? What about this biography of Muhammad? We've been told that it comes from Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham. And that's the classic book that you will get whenever you go to school. That's the book you have to read. Everybody has to read that book. You recognize it, don't you? And you've always trusted it, haven't you? Yes. Until today. Who wrote that book? Well, it's right there on the cover. The name's right there. Rasul Allah. The Sirah Rasul Allah written by Ibn Ishaq. Do you have any manuscript from Ibn Ishaq? No. So when you open up the pages of that book and you read the introduction, it's very clear that Ibn Ishaq had nothing to do with that book. In fact, it all comes from Ibn Hisham. That's what it says. But here's the problem. We don't have any manuscript from Ibn Hisham. So who actually wrote that book that you read and that everybody reads today? You want to know? You ready? This old gentleman right here wrote it. Heinrich Ferdinand Wustenfeld, a German scholar who between 1858 and 1860 compiled the biography of Muhammad. He then published it in 1860. That's 160 years ago, and everybody in the world now knew who Muhammad was. Therefore, the man who Muslims are dependent on, and same with you, Abdul, and Raymond who's listening, are dependent on to know who their prophet is or what he did, is an elderly German linguist who wrote Muhammad's story 160 years ago, thus over 1,000 years too late. Did you not know this? Is this the first time you're hearing this? Yes. I talked about this over a year ago. So where did he get his material from? That's the next question. Where did he get his material from? You just need to read his notes. Look at his notes. He explains where he gets it from. He goes to 6 different manuscripts. Are you ready? These are the 6 manuscripts he goes to. He does not go to these 2 guys. This is the one he should have gone to, Ibn Hisham and al-Waqidi. He goes to, there he is right there. He went to this manuscript in Fez in Morocco, dated to 1063. And another manuscript that comes from the British Library that's there today, that's dated from 1278. Another one that comes from the Bodleian Library in Oxford, that's 1300s. And another one that comes from Dublin in Ireland, that is the 1300s as well. And then another one that comes from the BNF, the Bibliothèque Nationale de Paris in Paris, that is 1400. And the one he used the most comes from the School of Oriental African Studies there in London, and it comes from 1589. Those are the 6 manuscripts he uses. Notice 5 of them are in Europe, 1 of them's in Morocco. And the one in Morocco he only used 25% of because he didn't trust the other 75%. So none of this comes from anybody named Ibn Hisham or al-Waqidi. They were all written from the 11th to the 16th century. So goodbye, we don't need you guys anymore. Therefore, every Western and Muslim scholar believes that the Sirah compilation was just 200 to 300 years after Muhammad, which is bad enough. Won't they be surprised when they find that they are really much later, between the 11th and 19th century, in other words, between 400 to 1200 years after Muhammad, written by a German scholar. So, who really created the 9th century and the 10th century hadith? Now, Muslims will say that they were all created by, well, we know who they were created by. Bukhari, Muslim, Dawud, Tirmidhi, Majah, and Nisai, all from the 9th century, right? And one from the 10th century. No. That is what they tell us. No, they're all lying. Abu Dawud is from the 11th century. That's 400 years after Muhammad. An-Nasai is from the 12th century. That's 500 years. Ibn Majah is from the 13th century. That's 600 years. Jami at-Tirmidhi is from the 14th century. That's 700 years. Same with Sahih Muslim. The second most authoritative comes from the 14th century. And Sahih Bukhari, the most authoritative one, the one that gives us 9 volumes, comes from the 14th and 15th century. That's 700 to 800 years after Muhammad. Folks, not one of these hadith were compiled in the 9th and 10th century. Their final extant manuscripts were not created, were not created until the 11th to the 15th century, which is 400 to 800 years later. Thus, not one of them ever heard a word of Muhammad said. This is the first time you're hearing it. Let's put it on a timeline. So that's what they say. They were all written there by those men in the 9th and 10th century. No, they weren't. They start to appear by Ibn Dawud in the 11th century, Nasai in the 12th century, Majah in the 13th century, 14th century for Al-Tirmidhi, same with Sahih Muslim, and the most important, Al-Bukhari, is not till the 14th and 15th century. Goodbye. Don't need those guys anymore. Which means that everything we have about what Muhammad said comes from 400 to 800 years too late. How can you defend him? Now we come and the Tahriq and the Tafsir. Now we've been told that the Tahriq and the Tafsir are written by this guy here, Al-Tabari, and then there are many that come after, Zamakhshari, Suyuti, and Badawi, and the others. But he is the first to write down everything that Islam needs. In fact, everybody loves Al-Tabari because he tells you everything about how you're to walk, talk, eat, drink, sleep, and he tells you all kinds of messed up stuff, and he contradicts himself here and there and gives you the chance to choose what you want. That's why everybody loves Al-Tabari. He was living in the 10th century, so we're told. No, we have nothing from him in the 10th century at all, not a thing. So where do we get Al-Tabari's material from? It was edited by a man named Michael Jean de Geuze, the professor of Arabic at Leiden University in Holland between 1879 and 1901, and is known as the Leiden edition. He went to 2 manuscripts written in the 13th century, which still exist today in Istanbul. These Arabic manuscripts, these were all written 600 years later, but he didn't put them together and compile them for the whole world to use until the last century. A Dutch scholar. So even Al-Tabari's Tahriq and Tafsir are not 10th century originals, but are much later 13th century compilations, which were merely attributed back to Al-Tabari 300 years earlier. Yet they are still 600 years too late. What's more, it took a Dutch scholar from Europe to compile them 1,200 years later. Why didn't the Muslims do this? Because the Muslims never wasted time doing this. They had no idea what Al-Tabari said until the last century. Isn't that amazing? And yet Muslims and Raymond says this is more historically attributable than any other piece of man, any other person. So I'm going to put everything on one screen. You ready? Let's put them all